In 1990, my husband decided to fake his death and elope with his unforgettable childhood sweetheart. In my past life, I bore the stigma of being a husband killer and was driven out of my in-laws' house. The village's old rogue dragged me into a cellar, and I was tortured for 3 days and nights before dying tragically. When I opened my eyes again, I heard the news of my husband's death. I turned around and remarried, accepting the marriage proposal from my childhood sweetheart next door. But later, my husband came back to life, only to cry and say he regretted it. I was reborn to the night my husband faked his death and eloped with his childhood sweetheart. I put away the death benefits I had originally planned to leave entirely to my parents-in-law. I was just about to pack my bags and remarry. Suddenly, there was a thud in the yard. The boy next door, my childhood sweetheart, climbed over the wall and knocked on my door. I opened the door and saw my childhood sweetheart, who looked almost exactly like my husband. I couldn't help but shudder violently. In my previous life, my husband, who worked in a coal mine, was underground digging coal when the mine suddenly collapsed. After my husband died, the coal mine sent 10,000 yuan as a death compensation. My in-laws were afraid I would run away with the money, so they knelt down and begged me. They even suggested that my childhood sweetheart should inherit both family lines. They wanted me to have a one-night stand with him to give my husband an heir. I rejected my in-laws' absurd proposal. It's pitiful that they lost their son, and I even voluntarily gave the 10,000 yuan death compensation from the coal mine to my in-laws, who knew that not long after. There were rumors in the village that my childhood sweetheart and I had been sleeping together for a long time. Hearing the rumors, Hu, my childhood friend, rushed into my house and slapped me hard. But on the way back to her parents' home, she fell into the big river, and her body was never found. After Qingmai died, I became the family's scapegoat. My mother-in-law cursed me as a jinx, saying I brought death to my husband and then to my brother-in-law's fiancé. My father-in-law, along with the clan, drove me out of the house, not allowing me to take a single penny. In the end, on my way back to my parents' home, I was knocked unconscious by an old bachelor in the village and thrown into a cellar. After 3 days and nights of inhumane torture, I unwillingly breathed my last. After death, my soul followed my in-laws, only to discover that my husband was not dead at all. He and the other workers who disappeared in the mine wanted to use the accident to earn a large sum of death compensation. It just so happened that my husband also wanted to take the money and elope with his childhood sweetheart. So, my husband decided to fake his death along with several other workers. In reality, they had secretly dug another tunnel underground long ago. After the mine collapsed, they threw their belongings into the bottomless mine shaft, but they secretly climbed up through the tunnel themselves. Everyone thought they had been crushed in the collapsed coal mine, their bodies lost forever in the pit. Little did they know that after the accident, their families received large sums of compensation and lived happily ever after. After faking his death, the husband secretly found his parents-in-law and took away the 10,000 yuan in compensation. Then, he changed his name and went south with his childhood sweetheart, Hu. Relying on this initial capital of 10,000 yuan, he invested in setting up a factory, became a big boss, and enjoyed unlimited success. Me and my childhood sweetheart, completely in the dark. One died tragically in a dark cellar. To grow old alone. Opening my eyes again, I see my childhood sweetheart's undisguised concern. I pulled him in at once. Seth Jiang, from now on, you are Nash Jiang. The little boy's face was red, and he looked at me with complicated eyes. I let him be dragged into the room by me and changed into Nash Jiang's clothes. Finally, I picked up the jade pendant from the dowry and threaded it with a red string, and personally put it around the little boy's neck. This jade is made of very ordinary jade and is worthless. However, the carving on it was done by a jade carving master who was sent down to our village. In my previous life, after I died, my husband took this jade. Later, in the business world, it was accidentally discovered by the descendants of the jade carving master. My husband also successfully climbed up to this jade carving family through this connection. He changed his career and started a jade business that made a lot of money every day. In this life, this immense wealth will no longer belong to him. Nash Jiang, The next day, my parents-in-law were the same as in my previous life. Invite the elders of the Jiang family to come, in front of all the relatives. With a thud, they knelt down in front of me. Arya, we're begging you as an old couple. You've been married to Nash for 2 years, and you haven't given him a son or daughter. Now that Nash is gone, if you don't have a child for him, won't our Nash's line be cut off? The Jiang family relatives also chimed in, urging me to agree to inherit 2 family lines. Just then, I smiled and pulled my childhood sweetheart out of my room. My mother-in-law was stunned for a moment, her face flushed red, and she pointed at me and began to curse. Well, Arya Chen, Nash is barely cold in his grave, and you're already sleeping in the same bed with Seth. You fickle slut, how can you face my Nash? I asked deliberately. Didn't you want him to have 2 wives and give me a child? My in-laws' faces instantly turned as constipated as could be. I took my childhood sweetheart's arm and continued. Besides, who said he was Seth? He's clearly my man, Nash. As soon as I finished speaking, the Jiang family relatives erupted. What? His Nash? Then who was it that had the accident down in the mine? That's not right. Nash is clearly the one who works at the coal mine. How did it become Seth? If his Nash, then where did Seth go? I smiled and unbuttoned Seth Jiang's collar, taking out the jade pendant that came with me as dowry. Now that things have come to this, Nash and I won't hide anything anymore. Actually, the one who went to work at the coal mine has always been my childhood sweetheart, Seth. My mother-in-law suddenly screamed. That's not right. Nash was the one who got the job at the coal mine. How could it be Seth going to work there? I deliberately sighed and explained. The coal mine job was indeed what Nash got into. But Nash said that he was the older brother and should naturally defer to his younger brother. Plus, Seth hadn't married yet, so Nash discussed it with me and decided to let Seth work at the coal mine for 3 years to earn some money to get married. Anyway, he and Seth are twins and look exactly alike. So the people at the mine can't tell them apart at all. We didn't expect the coal mine to suddenly have an accident. Nash and I meant well, but we ended up hurting my childhood sweetheart. My mother-in-law shook her head frantically. Impossible. Nash told me himself. My eyes sharpened, and I stared intently at my mother-in-law. What did Nash tell you? My mother-in-law closed her mouth guiltily, but her expression was unusually anxious. I know Nash Jiang must have secretly contacted his parents. They want to use their inheriting 2 family lines excuse, just like in our past life, to keep me at home. That way, they can justifiably take the 10,000 yuan, and let their beloved eldest son take his beloved woman and fly away. Unfortunately, in this life, there will be no more Nash Jiang who can be resurrected from the dead. After all, how could a wife mistake the husband she shares a bed with? The one who is with me can only be the real Nash Jiang. And the one who disappeared in the mine is my childhood sweetheart Seth Jiang. After hearing my words, with a thud, my mother-in-law fell to the ground. The hand holding the smoking pipe of my father-in-law was also trembling non-stop. They wanted to explain, to tell everyone that the real Nash Jiang was not actually dead. He had only faked his death and hid away in order to fraudulently obtain the death compensation from the coal mine. But if that happens, once things are exposed, not only would he lose his guaranteed job at the coal mine, but the 10,000 yuan death compensation would also be reclaimed by the coal mine. That's a whole 10,000 yuan. Nash Jiang worked as a coal miner in a coal mine, earning only 160 yuan a month. At this rate, how long would it take to save up 10,000 yuan? At this moment, the parents-in-law seemed to suddenly realize that both sons were their own. As long as the money stayed in their family, what did it matter which of their 2 sons received it? Although they hadn't figured out why the second child would impersonate the eldest, but right now, the most important thing is to protect this 10,000 yuan, no matter what. Looking at my in-laws' gradually firm gaze, I knew that Seth Jiang and I had won the bet. What I didn't expect was to hear that the one who died was my fiancé, Seth Jiang. Seth Jiang's fiancé, who was not saddened at all. Instead, she stormed into the funeral, pointing at her childhood sweetheart and shouting, "You've all been fooled. He's not Nash Jiang at all. He's Seth Jiang. Seth Jiang, you are heartless. You actually impersonated your brother and even tried to swallow your brother's death benefits. You deserve a terrible death." A gloomy look flashed in Seth Jiang's eyes, facing his fiancée's accusations. He calmly pulled out the jade pendant hanging around his neck and said to her, "Sister-in-law, I know Seth is gone, and you're heartbroken and can't accept it for a while. Which is understandable, but I'm really not Seth, I'm Nash. If you don't believe me, take a look. This jade pendant was part of my wife's dowry. Back then, when my wife heard that I had gotten a job at the coal mine, she was worried about me being in danger, so she gave me this jade pendant for safety. Later, I gave my coal mine job to my younger brother, Seth, but this jade pendant was part of my wife's dowry, so I didn't give it to him. If you don't believe me, you can ask my father-in-law and mother-in-law to take a look and see if this jade pendant was part of my wife's dowry." Fortunately, it was Seth Jiang's funeral today, and as relatives, my parents also came to attend. My mother stepped forward, picked up the jade pendant from the little bamboo horse's hand, turned it over to take a look, and said decisively, "That's right. This jade pendant is part of my Arya's dowry. I wore this jade pendant for more than 10 years. And later a small chip was broken off. It was when I was moving stones to build a reservoir that I accidentally chipped it on a rock, with ironclad evidence, plus my own wife admitting that my childhood sweetheart is my husband, Nash Jiang." Who, my childhood friend, had nothing to say and angrily left, throwing down the line, "You just wait and see. I know she must be going to find the real Nash Jiang, but so what? Does Nash Jiang dare to stand up and admit that he faked his death to fraudulently obtain compensation from the coal mine? 10,000 yuan is no small amount. It already constitutes suspected fraud. If he really dares to admit it, I wouldn't mind personally reporting him to the coal mine and sending him to jail." After Seth Jiang's funeral, the villagers all praised my husband and me for being foolishly lucky, giving the coal mine job to my younger brother-in-law, inadvertently allowed my husband to escape a disaster, and I didn't become a widow. But who was miserable in this life, she, like me in my previous life, not only bore the stigma of being a husband killer, but was also treated as a madwoman. Now the villagers are saying that who cannot accept the news of her fiancé's death. She insisted that the dead one was my man, and hers was still alive. She even impersonated her own elder brother and got together with his wife, and the result? Not a single person in the village believed her crazy talk. My childhood sweetheart and I were always together, working in the fields and chopping firewood in the mountains. Only, when it was time to sleep at night, Seth Jiang refused to get into bed no matter what, insisting on sleeping on the floor. I rolled off the bed with my blanket and landed right in Seth Jiang's arms. I breathed into his ear and said shyly, "Actually, the reason I haven't conceived your brother's child in the 2 years since I married into the family is because, your brother, he only has his siblings in his heart, he's never touched me." Seth Jiang swallowed, his eyes frighteningly bright. Suddenly, he ripped off the blanket covering my body. He turned over and pinned me to the ground. The next morning, I didn't get up until late. Seth Jiang, however, was full of energy, busying himself taking care of me. He brought me water to wash my face and brought lunch to my bed. My mother-in-law looked at us with a suspicious expression. Could it be that Nash isn't really dead? No one knew that Seth Jiang, like me, had also been reborn. In this life, Seth Jiang had completely figured things out, since in his previous life, his elder brother Anel who had cuckolded him. So in this lifetime, why couldn't he give his brother Anel who a green hat too? Perhaps the news of me and Seth Jiang consummating our marriage had completely enraged my husband. A few days later, one night, my in-laws, along with my husband Anel who, barged into me in Seth Jiang's room. Seeing me lying in Seth Jiang's arms, my husband's eyes were bloodshot with rage. "Arya Chen, you dare to cuckold me?" Who also pointed at me and my childhood sweetheart, saying smugly, "Nash, what did I tell you? Your wife and your brother have been hooking up for ages." Nash Jiang cursed angrily, "Seth Jiang, you dare to sleep with your sister-in-law." I rushed forward and slapped my husband hard across the face. "Seth Jiang, are you crazy? He's my man, your brother Nash Jiang." Nash Jiang looked at me in disbelief. "Arya Chen, look carefully. I am your man Nash Jiang. He's my brother, Seth Jiang, and he's impersonating me." I scoffed. Stop trying to confuse things here. Nash and I have been married for over 2 years. Do you think I wouldn't recognize my own husband? Besides, Nash is wearing our love token around his neck. You say you're Nash Jiang. Where's the proof? The husband was stunned. What love token? You've been married for 2 years. When did you ever give me a love token? I sneered inwardly. In my previous life, my husband never consummated our marriage, and once, after getting drunk, he held me and called out his childhood sweetheart's name. I knew there was someone in his heart, so, until he faked his death and eloped with his childhood sweetheart, I never gave this jade pendant away either. In this life, I have consummated my marriage with Seth Jiang. Of course, I have to give the token of love to Seth Jiang. I realized I had actually mistaken someone for someone else. I mistook Seth Jiang for my husband. My husband completely panicked. He came over and tried to take my hand. Arya, stop messing around. Okay, I admit. I didn't tell you about faking my death to get the pension beforehand. It was my fault, and I apologize. But I did it for our family. Think about it, that's 10,000 yuan in pension money. I'm digging coal in the mine, and my monthly salary is only 167 yuan. At this rate, how long will it take for our family to save 10,000 yuan? Either way, this pension is what I earned for the family. You mistook someone and consummated your marriage with Seth, and I can forgive you. But I'm taking this pension. I looked at Nash Jiang with greedy eyes, and Elhu with a hopeful face beside him, and suddenly laughed. Seth Jiang, you took your brother's place to work in the coal mine, and now the coal mine has declared you dead. The police station has also cancelled your household registration. Now, in the eyes of the law, you are already a dead man. What standing and qualification do you have to come back and fight for this compensation? Do you dare to stand up and tell people that you are not actually dead? Nash Jiang was stunned for a moment, and suddenly understood everything. You in cahoots with Seth Jiang. You want to steal my identity and my death benefits. I grabbed Seth Jiang's arm and took 2 steps back. I looked at my husband with a sneer. So what if we are? Isn't this all your own doing? You were the one who faked your death to get the compensation. And it was your parents who begged me to agree to let your brother inherit for both lines. Now, I listened to my in-laws and consummated the marriage with your brother. Why are you unhappy again? Nash Jiang's breathing quickened. His eyes filled with hatred as he looked at me and Seth Jiang. Dad and Mom were just saying it casually. I didn't expect you to actually do it with my brother. Arya Chen, be honest, have you had your eyes on my brother for a long time? I crossed my arms and looked at him mockingly. Likewise, haven't you been hooking up with your childhood sweetheart for ages? You even planned to fake your death to swindle a large death compensation and elope with your sweetheart, Nash Jiang. Since you've made up your mind to fake your death and run away with Elhu, then go ahead. Seth and I will help you 2 lovebirds. I didn't expect that Seth Jiang and I had already seen through their fake death plan. My husband and his childhood sweetheart panicked for a moment. Soon, my husband was the first to soften his tone. Arya, even if Elle and I have let Seth and you down, things have already reached this point. Why don't we just make the best of it? What do you want to do? Seth Jiang asked coldly. The husband held Elhu's hand and said righteously, no matter what, that 10,000 yuan of compensation was obtained by me faking my death, now that my household registration has been cancelled. In the future, I won't have a share of the homestead and contracted land in my hometown. The house and land are all yours, but Elle and I will be taking the 10,000 yuan in compensation money. Also, Mom and Dad are getting old, and it won't be convenient for Elle and me to come back in the future. So we'll leave them in your care. Clap, clap, clap. I raised my hand and applauded him. You're dumping the 2 old people on Seth and me, while you take the money and the woman to enjoy a carefree life in the big city. Nash Jiang, you really know how to play your cards. My husband's face turned ugly, clearly stung by my words, and he retorted, then what do you suggest? My household registration has already been cancelled by you. If I don't have money, how am I supposed to grease palms and get a new identity? I shrugged. That's your problem. Anyway, my childhood sweetheart, Seth Jiang, is legally dead. If you dare to cause trouble, I'll call the police. Guess, will the police come to arrest me first, or you? Instantly, My husband's face turned pale, and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. At this moment, he finally realized that his carefully planned fake death seemed to have gone awry. Who burst into tears, clutching her stomach, and knelt down in front of her parents-in-law with a thud. Dad, Mom, even if Nash did something wrong, he still earned a full 10,000 yuan for this family. I'm also pregnant with Nash's child. This is the eldest grandson of your Jiang family. Can you really bear to watch our family of 3 wander outside, without a household registration, and the child become an unregistered person along with us? As she spoke, she kowtowed to me, crying, Sister-in-law, I know Nash and I have let you down, but the child is innocent. I'm begging you, please, can you give us that $10,000? That's money Nash risked his life for, earned with his very life. Seeing the woman he loved kneeling on the ground, kowtowing to me repeatedly, my husband was instantly enraged. Arya Chen, do you have to force Elle and me to our deaths? Dad, Mom, are you really going to watch Elle and me be unable to register our household because we have no money, and take your grandson to beg for food outside? My mother-in-law's heart ached, and tears fell. My father-in-law also wore a stern face and commanded Seth Jiang and me, hurry and give that 10,000 yuan to Nash and Elle. You stay in our hometown, living and eating at home, and you don't have any children yet, so you don't spend much money. Nash and Elle can't come back to the village in the future. There are many places to spend money outside, and they have to raise children. Consider this 10,000 yuan as compensation for them. The mother-in-law nodded repeatedly. Nash has already given his parents and home to you. What more could you want? Hurry up and get the money out. Also, now that the second son has married his sister-in-law, the betrothal gifts that your father and I prepared for you before should go to Elle. Originally, these betrothal gifts were also prepared for her. I always knew my in-laws favored my husband, but I didn't expect them to be this biased. Since you are unrighteous, don't blame us for being unjust. Seth Jiang and I exchanged a look, pretending to let them into the house to get the money. My husband was also afraid that the villagers would discover his faked death. If someone reported it to the coal mine and the police caught him, he would definitely be sentenced. Seeing Seth Jiang and I give in, my husband quickly winked at his childhood sweetheart and pulled his parents into the room. Seth Jiang and I walked in last, and after the last person went in, we slammed the door shut and locked it. Help, thieves, murderous thieves. My little bamboo horse is barely cold in his grave, and they're already here to steal his death compensation. I ran into the village chief's house, crying my eyes out. Now the whole village knows that someone in my family had an accident in the mine, and the coal mine paid a large sum of money in compensation. It's not surprising that such a large sum of money would attract the attention of thieves. As soon as they heard that the thief had been caught by me and Nash Jiang and locked in the house, the whole village ran over to watch the excitement. The village chief called a few members of the joint defense team, and when they opened the door, the in-laws rushed out, the old couple blocking the door, preventing them from entering. Didn't they say they caught a thief? Where's the thief? The villagers suspiciously craned their necks to look inside the house. The mother-in-law, out of humiliation and anger, spread her arms and cursed, "Who's the thief? This is my son's house. I can go in whenever I want." The father-in-law, afraid that others would discover her husband and his childhood sweetheart inside, smoothed things over, saying, "It's a misunderstanding, it's getting late, everyone go back to sleep." I sneered, picked up the 2 large geese from under the eaves, and threw them in through the window. Elle, who was pecked by a goose when she was a child and is most afraid of geese, seeing the 2 large geese flapping their wings and heading straight for her. Elle, who screamed and instinctively jumped into her husband's arms. "What's that sound? Could that be Nash's mistress from your family?" As soon as the villagers saw the commotion, they swarmed forward, pushing aside the parents-in-law standing at the door. As a result, as soon as they entered, they saw Qingmai clinging to her husband like an octopus, impossible to tear off. "Holy crap, Seth, you're not dead." Caught red-handed by the villagers, my husband was at a loss. His face alternating between green and red, forced by the situation, he had no choice but to admit that he was indeed Seth Jiang. At this moment, a villager suddenly asked a question that everyone was concerned about. "Seth, now that you're not dead, Can your family keep the 10,000 yuan compensation from the mine? Dismiss the villagers who came to watch the commotion, the village chief said to the in-laws and husband with a meaningful look. With so many people in the village, it's impossible to keep the fact that Seth is not dead a secret. Make a decision as soon as possible. Are you going to the Public Security Bureau to turn yourselves in, or take the initiative to find the coal mine to admit the mistake and return the money to them? After the village chief left, my husband gritted his teeth and with a thud, knelt down in front of me and Seth Jiang. Arya, Seth, please, give Elle and me a way out, Seth Jiang asked with a cold face. What do you want? My husband said with a frantic expression, there's no other way, we have to run. Arya, give me that $10,000, I'm taking Elle away tonight. Don't worry, as long as you give us the money, Elle and I will never come back here again, and no one will expose Seth's true identity. You can be a legal couple for the rest of your lives. Seth Jiang laughed. What are you saying? Seth, I'm your brother Nash, your sister-in-law, and I are a legally married couple. My husband was stunned for a moment, his expression gradually turning ferocious. You just want to force me to my death, force Elle to her death, don't you? I deliberately said in a sarcastic tone to comfort him. We're all family. Seth, you escaped this disaster and returned safely from the coal mine. Your brother and I, and your parents, are overjoyed. Since it was just a misunderstanding, let's return the money to the mine. Seth, you should stay in the village and farm from now on. Get married to Elle soon. We can't let Elle's child be born without legal status, can we? Hearing me say the words farming, my husband broke down in a second. No Tilda, I don't want to go back to the village, I don't want to farm. Arya Chen, are you doing this on purpose to get back at me? You just don't want me to take that $10,000 and take Elle to the city to live a good life. I laughed. Nash Jiang, you're only realizing it now. You didn't think that you hid it from me. Secretly faked your death, and swindled such a large sum of compensation from the coal mine, and still wanted to take your childhood sweetheart, take the money, and go to the big city to live the high life. Have you ever thought about how I'm supposed to live in the village with the terrible reputation of being a husband killer after you faked your death and ran away? What if the coal mine discovers you faked your death and comes to me for money since they can't find you? What am I supposed to do? Since you were the first to be unrighteous and unjust, then don't blame us for being ruthless and heartless. Seth, you can let the comrades from the coal mine come out now. Hearing the last sentence, my parents-in-law hadn't reacted yet, but my husband's face turned ashen in an instant. He scrambled up and tried to run out. Unfortunately, he was a step too slow. Several burly men in security uniforms rushed out of the woodshed next door. They rushed forward and pinned the husband firmly to the ground. Crack, the handcuffs were locked on. It's over. The mother-in-law fell down to the ground in a sitting position. The father-in-law rolled his eyes and fainted on the spot. She who went crazy and rushed forward, desperately pulling her husband's arm. Nash, you can't leave. If you leave, what about me and the baby in my belly? After saying that, she turned around and glared fiercely at me. Arya Chen, I've already given you my man, so why are you still not letting me and Nash go? I walked over and slapped Elle, whose fair face, with a loud slap. Was it me who faked Nash Jiang's death? Was it me who let you two dogs sneak around and elope? Elle, who, what goes around comes around. You two deserve what you're getting today. It's divine retribution. Plump. Elle, who fell to the ground, clutching her stomach, looking completely bewildered. Because of suspicion of a large-scale fraud, our whole family was taken to the police station by the mine's security team. Myself and Seth Jiang had no intention of hiding anything. We truthfully confessed to everything. In the 1990s, a fraud case involving more than 100,000 yuan was already considered a major case. The Public Security Bureau received intelligence and launched a raid overnight, quickly catching several coal miners who, like Nash Jiang, had faked their deaths and secretly returned home to claim their pensions. Seth Jiang and I were released quickly because we hadn't participated in the fraud and had proactively reported it to the police. My parents-in-law and Elle, who have been temporarily detained by the Public Security Bureau for their involvement in my husband's faked death fraud, a few days later, Her parents-in-law brought a pale-faced Elle who back to the village, just back to the village. My mother-in-law rushed over angrily and raised her arm to slap me. I leaned back so sharply that my mother-in-law almost threw out her back. The mother-in-law took the opportunity to plop down on the ground, slapping her thigh and wailing, "Come and see, Aria Chen, you two-timing bitch. Your husband has been taken by the Public Security Bureau, yet you don't go save your husband, instead you end up in the same bed with your childhood friend. I'm telling you, if Nash really goes to jail, I'll never forgive you. I'm going to make sure everyone for miles around knows about your scandalous affair, and see how you can face anyone." Hearing my mother-in-law's words, I felt a sense of relief and glanced at Seth Jiang. At this moment, I knew that Seth Jiang's last bit of sentiment towards his in-laws was also cut off by his mother-in-law with her own hands. After my mother-in-law caused a scene at my house, Seth Jiang and I packed our bags the next day, ready to go to the city to find work. My in-laws rushed over when they learned that Seth Jiang and I were leaving. His father-in-law's face was livid as he began to reprimand him. There are so many things happening at home now, and the eldest son is still in detention. Instead of thinking about saving people, you just up and left. Do you even care about this family, about your parents? My mother-in-law plopped down on the ground again, continuing to hurl the same insults she used yesterday at me and Seth Jiang. Seth Jiang gave a bitter laugh and said to his parents-in-law and the surrounding villagers, "Did you all hear that? It's not that I don't want to stay in my hometown, it's my father and mother who don't leave me and Aria the slightest chance to survive." With that, Seth Jiang knelt down and kowtowed 3 times to his parents-in-law. "Mom, Dad, I listened to you and agreed to inherit for 2 branches of the family and be with my sister-in-law. You said if my brother went to jail, you wouldn't let me live in the village anymore, and I listened. I'll take the sister-in-law away right now. I don't want this room anymore. You can give it to the older brother and Elle. From now on, you two will be a family. My sister-in-law and I won't come back anymore. We'll be a burden to Dad and Mom." The in-laws were completely stunned. By the time they came to their senses, I and Seth Jiang had already boarded the bus heading into the city. It was 2 months later before I heard again about my husband and his childhood friend. My husband was sentenced to 10 years in prison for faking his death to commit fraud, involving a huge amount of money. After my husband's verdict came down, I heard that Elle, who disregarded her in-laws' desperate pleas, decisively went to the hospital and had an abortion. Then, arranged by her family, she immediately married a man who had just lost his wife. I heard that when Elle who got married, her in-laws ran to the wedding and made a scene. In the chaos, my father-in-law was hit in the forehead by a flying stool, and blood gushed out immediately. During the altercation, my mother-in-law accidentally fell into the large pot of simmering soup, suffering extensive burns all over her body. Since my husband has been sent to prison, the hospital can only call me and Seth Jiang. Unexpectedly, when we arrived at the hospital, my father-in-law was already gone. My mother-in-law has burns all over her body. The hospital said there's no point in trying to save her and told us to say our final goodbyes. Lying in the hospital bed, my mother-in-law was covered in bandages. Pale yellow fluid seeped through the gauze, and the room reeked of rotting flesh. Upon seeing me and Seth Jiang entering, my mother-in-law's clouded eyes sparkled with a strong will to survive. "Seth, Aria, help me." Seth Jiang shook his head. "The doctor said the burn area is too large, there's nothing they can do." Tears streamed down my mother-in-law's face as she stared intently at Seth Jiang and me, uttering her final request. Your older brother isn't easy. After I'm gone, the house, land, and savings will all go to your brother." Seth Jiang nodded, took my hand, and turned to leave. An hour later, the hospital notified us that my mother-in-law's breathing and heartbeat had stopped. After sending back the ashes of my in-laws to their hometown, my husband and I left the small village. Returning to my hometown again, it's been 10 years. A lot has happened in the last decade. In this life, Seth Jiang and I know many opportunities of later generations in advance. Seize the opportunity. We earned our first fortune by operating the canteen at the construction site. First, we invested in real estate speculation. After accumulating a large amount of capital, we also established our own real estate development company. over the course of 10 years. Our assets soared from just a few hundred yuan when we first came to the city to hundreds of millions. We became a well-known real estate developer in the local area. We also invested in industries that would become highly profitable in later generations, such as home appliances, mobile phones, and the internet. Over the past decade, Seth Jiang and I have been a loving couple, and we've been blessed with a son and a daughter, making the Chinese character for good complete. The village heard that my parents had become big bosses outside and invited us to return home to invest time and again. It just so happens that Seth and I also want to help our hometown escape poverty and become prosperous. On the day we returned, not only the local villagers but even leaders from the county and the city came to welcome us warmly. Among the crowd, I vaguely caught a glimpse of my ex-husband, Nash Jiang's figure. Upon seeing me back, the villagers all spoke at once, telling me and Seth about what had happened in our family over the years. That's when we found out that, because he had behaved well in prison, my ex-husband had been released 3 years ago early. It would have been better not to get out of prison at all. Only after the fact did my ex-husband realize that his parents had made a scene at Who's wedding to vent their anger on his behalf. They both passed away in the days he was in prison. However, Who didn't gain any advantage either. She had already committed adultery with her future brother-in-law and had an illegitimate child, so her reputation in the village was already ruined. As a result, when she remarried, her in-laws came to her door and caused a scene. The groom's family felt they had lost face and, in anger, called off the wedding on the spot. Now, Who is definitely never going to get married. Her family also felt ashamed of her and kicked Who out. Who had no choice but to pick the Jiang family's lock and move in, claiming to be the Jiang family's daughter-in-law, due to her laziness and love of ease. Who has had ambiguous relationships with the men in the village and town over the years in order to make a living. The villagers often saw different men emerging from Who's house with their belts in hand when they got up early. What's ridiculous is that the ex-husband came home and saw Who actually in his own house. He had always thought that over these years, Who had been waiting for him, but just a few days later, he personally caught Who having an affair with her lover in his house. The ex-husband caused a big scene and even tried to hit Who, but he was beaten up badly by her and the lover. After finishing, Who lit a cigarette and said with a mocking expression, "Being a kept woman requires the attitude of a kept woman. You're eating my food and drinking my wine, yet you dare to ask who I sleep with. I don't sleep with men. Do you think the daily necessities and the big meals at home just appear from nowhere?" Ex-husband hated Who very much, but he also knew that, after having been in prison, he wouldn't be able to find a job once he got out. Staying in his hometown to farm, he couldn't bear the hardship either. In this way, the ex-husband and Who, this so-called true love couple who had run away together in a past life, although both wished to kill each other, still had no choice but to be tied together for the sake of survival. Who needs her ex-husband's house. Her ex-husband needs Who to make money to support him. Years later, Who died at home from a venereal disease because she had no money for treatment. With no one earning money to support him, her ex-husband could only do farm work like the other villagers during the busy farming season. During the off-season, I worked as a laborer building houses, collecting recyclables. I did all sorts of things. Rumor has it that Seth and I are back, and we've become billionaires. My ex-husband hid in the crowd, watching us greedily with a look of regret on his face. In that moment, he suddenly wondered if back then, he hadn't faked his death and eloped with Who. Instead, he chose to live a good life with me. So now, is the man with billions in assets standing next to me? Is that him? An unworthy wife can ruin 3 generations. At this moment, Nash Jiang finally understood the truth in the old saying, only, it's all too late. With layers of bodyguards and police protection, he couldn't get close to me and Seth at all. As we were leaving, Seth and I sat in the car, and through the car window, we faintly heard shouts coming from behind us. At this moment, we are discussing the new investment project back in our hometown with the leaders of the municipal government. The cries filled with regret eventually faded away in the wind. A few days later, a call came from our hometown village, telling us, Nash Jiang went crazy and jumped into an abandoned mine in our hometown. That mine was deep beyond measure, with water filling it to dozens of meters. There's absolutely no way to salvage it. The village asked us what to do. Seth and I exchanged a look and sighed, saying, then, let's give up on the salvage. 10 years ago, Nash Jiang had orchestrated the fake death of the coal mine. 10 years later, he actually died in the same mine where the incident had occurred. This could be considered a case of cause and effect cycling.